Hello, Mr. Body. My name is Professor McDonald with the University of Arizona. I'm calling you from Tucson. I'm doing some work currently on the UFO problem, and I'm digging into some of the older cases to try to check back on what was involved in some of them. I'm calling you to ask if you would have a minute to spare a couple of questions about that classic incident in Farmington back in 1950 when a rather large number of objects were seen. Would you be able to spare 10 minutes at the moment? The cotton hypothesis was pretty well brushed aside before the thing was even cold, wasn't it?
Oh, I think so, as well as the spring paper and all the other jazz you hear about.
Yeah. Well, the one that still stands, as far as I can tell, in the Wright-Patterson files, I've been with Wright-Patterson several times looking into this, is the ruptured balloon idea. I have written to Holloman to try to get actual data on whether there even was a balloon over there, and I'm contacting some balloon people about breakup. But as one of the witnesses, how would you appraise that hypothesis that it was a fragmented balloon?
I mean, I would question it. It didn't appear to me to be that at the time, let's say.
They seem to be substantial objects of discernible...
Substantial objects.
So your feeling would be that it wasn't likely to be fragments of plastic.
I don't think it would be likely to be.
Did they move at high angular velocity, or did they flutter down, or what kind of motions were perceptible?
It would appear to me to be fairly high angular, perhaps, but I don't know. I don't know. I'm not enough of science to know.
The objects were not simply coming down.
Yeah.
They were moving across the sky at times.
Yeah.
And were they all moving in the same direction?
Yeah.
Do you remember what that was?
Yeah. Let's see. They were moving in the northwest.
Towards or from?
Toward.
Towards the northwest. About how long do you think objects were observable? Was it?
Oh, golly, I don't know. 2 or 3 guys and I sat there and looked at them and said, how about that? We watched them for some time, and then I went on back to the newspaper because they finally went out of sight. I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes, I suppose.
That's in the case of your own observation.
Yeah.
And were there others who did observe them later in the day, as far as you know?
I don't know whether later in the day. I happened to be with 2 or 3 people when we observed them, and I'm sure their attitude is a little like mine. They kind of shrugged their shoulders and so on, because we weren't sure of it. This happened about, maybe 9 o'clock in the morning.
How many objects were there when you saw them? Do you recall roughly?
Oh, I wouldn't have any idea. I would say it was a group.
Like as many as half a dozen?
Oh, yeah, I think it's more than that.
More than half a dozen. Several dozen? Or what kind of a ballpark guess is involved there?
Oh, I would say between 20 and 30.
30. And were they in that range? Were they in any formation?
Yes, they were.
What kind of formation?
Well, I felt that there was one red one that appeared to be leaves.
Distinctly red.
Others that were following the formation in silver.
And was it a V or what? Line?
No, I don't think it was. Not as I think back and looking at ducks moving south and that kind of thing. I don't think it was in a V formation. It looked like a group of things in the air with one red leader.
I didn't see them right away, but I went outside, and all these older kids were outside at recess. They were looking up. They pointed them out to me and said, "Hey, look here what we got." It was pretty interesting. I thought it was just downright cool. You know, I'd never seen anything like that before. I didn't know what they were, but everybody standing around with their mouth open looking up. The first day, we saw maybe 12 or 15 squares. And I say squares because these things were in a very geometric formation, you know, like patches on a quilt. And but you look up at them, and they look like dominoes, you know, like you'd have 9 or 12 of them. And they were just dots. They look like silver shiny dots. And as you look up at them, you'd see maybe 9 or 12 of them in a formation. And there were always extra dots floating outside the formation, they would fly into the formation, and it looks like they would bump another one out the other side, and it would rattle around, and you go places and do things and find another formation, and they were more in the formation than they were floating around loose. And it seemed like every time one would go into a formation, another one would have to come out of the formation. That first day there were probably 12 or 15 of them that we were looking at, and then the second day they were horizon to horizon. Yeah, you just couldn't count them all. Like in a quilt pattern, and they still have the same thing going on, different dots moving amongst the patterns. If they were moving at all, they were moving from the southwest to the northeast. They seemed to be fairly stable and very slow moving if they were moving at all. Looking back on my pilot experience, I would say they were airline level. Maybe at that time, airline level would have been above 13,000 feet, 13 to 30,000 feet, somewhere in that area. The first day there were like some high cirrus clouds moving, wind clouds. And then the second day was severe clear. Things stood out like very vividly. And then the third day there were a lot less. I would say there were probably 30 of these squares. And we never saw them again after that.
If they were moving southwest to northeast, and assuming, of course, that they were on a straight line path this entire time, that would have brought them over Farmington, heading over Aztec.
General area, yes.
And so on all three instances, as far as you can recall, they were moving in that same direction, that same trajectory?
Yes, I believe so.
And how many school children, roughly, do you think were out there with you at any given time during recess?
So I would imagine it would have been anywhere between 35 and 40.
Any rough times that you might have seen these objects during those 3 days?
Yeah, I would say morning recess would have been about 9 o'clock, and then we had an hour for lunch.
That'd be at 12 noon?
Yeah, and then again probably 2:30, and then we were out of school by 4.
Do you recall seeing those after school as well, or was it primarily during recess?
I don't recall seeing them after school, although they probably were there. We were standing around outside there looking up, and we all thought it was pretty neat. We didn't know what it was, but it didn't appear to pose any threat to us. I do remember our teacher, our class teacher, was visibly shaken. She was even crying a little bit. I think she didn't know what it was, but she was a little bit afraid. This guy's, bunch of young boys, we thought, well, this is strange. We were disappointed when they didn't come back.
After 3 days, you were getting used to seeing them up there.
Yeah, we thought it was kind of fun.
Well, about all I can say is we did see something. I don't know what.
Did they pass directly overhead, or were they a long way from your location?
Oh, I don't remember exactly, but they weren't right exactly over us, but not too far from us.
And were they moving in a straight course, or was there anything unusual in the way they moved through the air?
Well, they were kind of in a formation, if that's what they mean.
Was it a V?
No. Well, there were too many of them to be a V. I don't know. I just don't know how to catch it.
I see. But they moved along in straight fashion, somewhat like aircraft or geese or something like that. They were moving straight rather than... They weren't... Were there any bouncing around or erratic motions that you recall?
Well, no, not exactly.
I see. Okay.
I guess someone came inside and said, there's strange things up in the air. So among a lot of the other people in the dealership and people on Main Street, we went out and started looking. And lo and behold, right very close there, up at an angle of maybe 60 degrees or so, or a little more, there's a flotilla of something flying up there. And I stayed and looked at it for a little while, and then had to go back into, business or something called me back. And for several days after that, I guess the same thing occurred.
Correct.
I understand. It was the first day.
And did you notice any sound? Do you recall any sound?
No, I don't recall any sound at all.
Okay.
And I don't remember it was a clear day. I don't know if the wind was blowing, but there's no storm around or anything. they're just more or less a blob up there. They were not defined. I couldn't say they were triangulated. They weren't round. I don't know how to describe them. They were irregular shaped because they're so far away. And as far as formation, they weren't blowing to and from, intermingling with each other. They weren't strictly formation as we would define it today, pretty jumbled together, but they stayed that way separated. I don't remember them intertwining back and forth like a wind would do with a group of blowing leaves. Subsequently, we had a lot of, or several branches of the government came in. I don't know whether the FBI came in and interviewed me, and others in town. I had the same story that I told them. I didn't know what I saw. I saw something. I can't deny that. But I don't know what it was. I don't know how fast they were going, how high they were, anything about them except I saw something.
The next one of serious importance, again, was before, well, it was after Kenneth Arnold described flying saucers. Yeah, that was in 1949. But the next photo event of interest happened on the 17th of March in 1950 at Farmington, New Mexico, when on that day, Mr. Walter Rogel, managing editor of the Farmington Times, published news on the front page of his paper, "Huge Saucer Armada Jolts Farmington." Now, what happened on that day, the town's population of about 5,000 people then, looked up and saw spaceships, circular, disc-shaped, metallic disc-shaped craft with domes on the top, passing over their city. They were changing position within the formation like a flock of bees or birds. They did not maintain a regular established formation. It was just a large gaggle of objects that flew over. Hundreds of them flew over for almost 2 hours, and the same thing happened the following day. One picture escaped collection by the military people that went there and canvassed the houses. They took all the pictures, took cameras, but somebody had in town, left town after taking the photographs and took one to Durango, Colorado, where he turned it into the Durango paper, and Durango published this one photograph. Shows about 7 or 8 of the objects in the sky, 5 of them in a loose formation at lower level and 4 or 5 at higher levels beyond it.
The greatest exhibition of magnetic flight that has ever happened in this universe, insofar as we know, came on the second day of the memorable day at Farmington, New Mexico, when there the sky was filled with flying saucers. The editor of the local paper selected some dozen reliable businessmen of that city, and on the second day, hoping for the return of the visitors of the previous day, were amazed when suddenly at 11 a.m. in the morning, the sky was again filled with these strange circular visitors from another world. These gentlemen, calm, although excited beyond anything that had ever happened to them, undertook to estimate and count the ships that swarmed the air for nearly an hour that day. And they reported that, in their judgment, there was between 400 and 500 ships that had flown into the vision of the people of that northern New Mexico town from another